Speaking of talented drivers, Pastor Maldonado. Again, I segue
Good one,
so
Dre.
well, don't I? Yeah. I mentioned this before off the air. I said before how I call this segment the Renault shit because there's almost guaranteed to be a story coming out of Enstone with F1 these days because it's never quiet down that part of the F1
No,
world for
not at
some
all.
reason. Like every podcast, there's something going on down there. And here's the latest story: Pastor Maldonado apparently on the brink of losing his seat because his sponsors are paying late, and it basically goes hand in hand with the rumors going around that Kevin Magnussen was seen in Enstone last week talking to Renault about a potential seat, maybe a third driver role, etc. Now,
The darling of Twitter returns.
I don't like talking about Pastor because there's no middle ground on Pastor
No, I wasn't talking
Maldonado.
about Pastor. I was talking about Kevin Magnussen, the greatest driver not in F1.
I was getting to that. It's like there's already one thing with Pastor going on because like there's no middle ground on him. It's either everybody like wants to defend him at every given opportunity, while on the other end everybody can't wait to bash him whenever he messes up. And then you put
Or
that,
even when he doesn't.
yeah, even when he doesn't to a degree, because his name was thrown around a lot last year. When half of the time it wasn't actually his fault that he was taken out of a race or whatever. So
Yeah.
there's no middle ground on Pastor, and when you combine that with Kevin Magnussen, who is a real internet darling driver. Magnussen's not bad by any stretch of the imagination, but he wasn't that great the 1 year he was in F1 in the first place. So when you combine Pastor's situation with Kevin's situation, it's a bit like making one of those volcanoes you see in those science experiments in America. You're going to get an overflow and you're going to get an eruption of hype train because people are desperate to see another young'un in Formula One again. Like,
Yeah.
I've said it before, like, it used to be the talk of, we don't want pay drivers in F1. Now it's the talk of, I don't want that pay driver in F1.
Yeah.
Like, so we've become more specific over the years. It's like we want young talent in F1. No, not that one, that guy.
Not Julian Palmer.
No, that guy. Like, Julian Palmer is 24, and people are talking like he's 36 or something. So, it's already a rough enough situation it is, and the perception of pay drivers in Formula One has never been a particularly healthy one. But King, you're the Magnussen fan around here.
No pressure.
You're the Magnussen meme maker on this. You talk about this a bit more because
Okay.
It's a confusing one.
On the Kevin Magnussen side of things, I don't see him getting the race seat. It seems more likely that he's going to become Renault's new reserve driver because they signed on the reserve driver to the race seat.
That's true. That's true. Julian Palmer, of course.
Yeah, and on the passenger side of things, it's so much more complex and nuanced than anyone on the internet's making this out to be. Number one, PDVSA, billion-dollar oil company. The reason why they're late on payments is because Venezuela is it's terrible right now. Inflation skyrocketing, their economy is on the brink of collapse, and PDVSA represents about half the country's economy. So when the rest of the economy is crashing, someone has to fit the bill, and that's pretty much them.
Yeah, so with Venezuela's oil reserves and economy in general going down the shitter, of course it's going to have a knock-on effect for Pastor, who is heavily sponsored by said company.
Well, this sounds a lot like the situation with Mikhail Aloshin, or however you pronounce his surname.
Yes.
And a similar thing with SMP Racing, who were sponsored by, was it the Russian government, or was it a Russian sort of high-up
bank.
businessy? Yeah,
Bank.
Russian bank. The SMP Bank, isn't it?
Yeah,
Yep.
and
Yeah.
to even make an even more evident example, Felipe Massa had the same talk around him because he was sponsored by Petrobras, and they had an enormous bill at their doorstep last year. So that was obviously talk about Massa not being able to race next year, which is not actually happening. But again, we've seen these stories come up before, but because it's Pastor, I think people have reacted, more favorably in this regard, or made more of a fuss about it because it's a guy that people don't really want to see in Formula One, even though. While Pastor is no Romain Grosjean, he's no Nico Hulkenberg, he's not on that tier with those kinds of dudes. I don't think Pastor is anywhere near as bad as the internet wants to think he is.
The problem is the internet still thinks this is 2012. I mean, when Grosjean was announced at Haas, I genuinely saw people on Twitter saying they've just hired that guy who crashes on the first lap. I'm like, really? 2012
Yeah.
was 4 years ago now. Have you not paid attention to what Roman's been doing since then?
And people don't talk about that absolutely exceptional run he made in the second half of 2013, where he was legitimately challenging for wins. He was the biggest threat.
And
to
of course, he got
to
that
Vettel's
podium
run.
last year for Lotus.
Yeah, of
On
course.
the same weekend, they had bailiffs at their trucks.
Yeah, like, people forget Grosjean is a top world-class driver. There's no doubt about that. Anyone that still wants to bury Grosjean for 2012 is an idiot at this point in time, quite frankly, because they've clearly chosen selective memories to
Just not been paying attention.
Yeah, they've not been paying attention. It's as simple as that. And while Pastor, like I said, Pastor is no prize, it's a situation where he's 31 in April. He's entering year 6. If he really was that bad, he would not still be here. And like I said, he's entering year 6 of his F1 career now. Like, are we not all just bored of making Pastor jokes at this point? Like, I know it's an easy Twitter favorite from like 12-year-olds on the internet, but Pastor is not as bad as people like to think he is.
At this point, he makes no more mistakes than any other driver in F1. In fact, after Sebastian Vettel's Mexico Grand Prix of last year, I have to say I don't think Maldonado even had a race that was that bad all of last year. So
No, he didn't. And at least I said I'd like to think he did. I still remember the Sky Sports F1 team giving him a -1 out of 10 score for China, even though he was taken out by Jenson Button that day. So people like to use the stick of the past to beat Pastor with.
And let's not forget, Lotus have been on a real downer the last 2 years. 2014, their car was dreadful. I mean, it was the car that made Romain Grosjean lose his temper in Singapore, and that's something you never see from Grosjean.
Yeah.
And 2015 was a lot better, but still, there was a lot
the worst of the Mercs teams.
Yeah, exactly, and there was still a big axe hanging over them over the unpaid bills. I mean, was it in Japan they couldn't get into their own hospitality?
Yeah.
I mean, that must have been a nightmare for the drivers.
Yeah.
So Maldonado came into that team in fairly difficult circumstances. So
Let's put it to you this way. Would you rather see Pastor on the grid, or would you rather see no Lotus team at all? End of discussion. I'm going to take another break before those words resonate with you, and we'll be back for the Q&A segment of the podcast.